5 words. That is all the judge needed to hear. 5 words, and my husband's $2 million empire collapsed like a wet paper bag. The mediator locked the heavy oak door and looked my husband dead in the eye. Julian's smug smile disappeared for the first time in 8 years. He had walked into that high-end downtown Austin boardroom treating it like a victory lap. He thought he was leaving me homeless. He thought I was drowning in debt, begging for a $20,000 settlement just to survive the winter. He did not know I had spent the last 6 months mapping his entire digital life. But let me back up, because this moment right here, this is just the payoff. And the payoff means absolutely nothing without the 8 months of absolute hell that came before it. You need context, because a woman like me does not end up dropping a 200-page federal dossier on her husband unless she is pushed completely past the breaking point. And brother, I was pushed. My name is Ellen Vance. I am 36 years old and I live in Austin, Texas. If you ask my husband what I do for a living, he would roll his eyes, take a sip of his overpriced craft beer, and tell you I am just a spreadsheet girl. He loved saying that. Spreadsheet girl. It made him feel big. It made him feel like his cryptocurrency startup was changing the world while I was just pushing boring numbers around a screen. But I am not a spreadsheet girl. I am a data architect. I build the foundational systems that track where every single piece of digital information goes, how it gets there, and who tried to hide it along the way. I see the footprints people leave behind when they think nobody is watching. It is quiet work. It is invisible work, and it turned out to be the exact weapon I needed. I did not grow up around tech money. I grew up in a loud, messy house in San Antonio, raised mostly by my Grandpa Henry. He was a mechanic who smelled like motor oil and cheap coffee. Grandpa Henry did not know what a blockchain was, but he understood leverage better than any Silicon Valley billionaire. I remember sitting on his porch when I was 12 years old, watching him negotiate a parts contract on a landline phone. He hung up, looked at me, and gave me the only piece of advice that ever really mattered. The person who controls the data controls the narrative. He said it quiet. He meant it loud. I never forgot it. I took that mindset into everything I did. I learned to watch, to document, to let other people talk while I took notes. I liked a quiet life. I drove a 5-year-old Camry. I drank regular drip coffee. My only real dream was to save enough money to buy a small, quiet 10-acre ranch property out in the Texas Hill Country. I wanted a porch where I could watch the sunrise. I wanted to start my own independent data consultancy and leave the corporate grind behind. It was a simple dream. Julian hated it. Julian was 38. He was the kind of guy who used words like scale, vision, and alpha in casual conversation. We met at a tech mixer downtown 8 years ago. Back then, his ambition was intoxicating. He had this raw, magnetic energy. He made you feel like you were standing on the edge of the future just by talking to him. Our first date was at a taco truck, and we stayed up until 3 in the morning drawing business models on napkins. I thought I had found an equal. I thought we were building a life together. I ignored the red flags. Look, I know how that sounds. Everyone says they ignored the red flags in hindsight, but when you are in it, a red flag just looks like passion. When he talked over waiters, I told myself he was just assertive. When he criticized my clothes for not being elevated enough, I told myself he just wanted me to look my best. The good times were really good. We would drive out to the lake on Sundays, turn off our phones, and just be normal people. He would make me laugh until my ribs hurt. But about 2 years ago, the crypto boom hit hard, and Julian caught the wave. His startup got a massive influx of venture capital. Suddenly, our modest life was not enough. We moved into a sterile, modern mansion in Westlake Hills that felt more like a museum than a home. He started buying $1,000 sneakers. He started hosting dinner parties with people who talked entirely in buzzwords, and the warning signs started flashing neon red. The first thing I noticed was the phone. He used to leave it on the counter, unlocked, completely unbothered. Then, suddenly, it was glued to his hand. The passcode changed. He started taking business calls in the backyard, pacing frantically by the pool. When I asked him about it, he would gaslight me into oblivion. He would sigh, rub his temples like I was giving him a migraine, and say I just did not understand the pressure of running a high-level enterprise. Then came the home network change. I woke up one Saturday to find our home internet was down. Julian was standing in the living room holding our router. He said he was upgrading our security because of his company. He changed the network name to Advanced Capital Secure and set a new password. I asked him what the password was so I could connect my laptop. He waved his hand dismissively and said he would type it in for me later. He said it was too complex to just hand out. To his own wife, a password for the Wi-Fi. I let it go at the time. It was a tiny, seemingly insignificant detail. But remember what I said about footprints? That little detail was the seed that would eventually grow into his prison cell. The real fracture happened on a Tuesday night. I was looking for a stamp in his home office desk. I opened the bottom drawer and found a stack of mail addressed to a Nevada limited liability company. The company name was Horizon Apex. I had never heard of it. I opened one of the bank statements. It showed a balance of $400,000. My stomach hit the floor. I checked the date. The money had been transferred from our joint savings account 3 days prior. I confronted him when he got home. I was shaking. I asked him why almost $500,000 was sitting in a Nevada shell company. He did not apologize. He did not look guilty. He looked annoyed. He poured himself a glass of bourbon, leaned against the granite counter, and laughed. He told me I was being hysterical. He said he was restructuring our assets to protect us from liability. He said the board advised him to do it, and it was too complicated to explain to someone who just stared at spreadsheets all day. That is when I knew. You do not hide $500,000 from your wife to protect her. You hide it because you are preparing to leave her. If you are listening to this, do me a favor. Hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you are listening from. I read every single one. All right, back to the story because it gets worse, much worse. I did not scream. I did not throw plates. I just nodded and walked away. And that is when the escalation began. Julian realized I was not going to fight him loudly, so he decided he could just walk all over me. It started with disrespect. We were at a dinner party with his investors at an expensive steakhouse downtown. I was sitting quietly, eating my food, when one of the partners asked my opinion on a new tech regulation. Before I could open my mouth, Julian laughed loudly and put his hand over mine. "Oh, do not bother Elena with that," he said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "She is just a spreadsheet girl. Leave the real money to the adults, honey." The table chuckled. My face burned. I looked at him, and his eyes were completely dead. There was no love there, just a bully enjoying his audience. 2 weeks later, the control phase kicked in. I went to the grocery store to buy dinner. I swiped my debit card for $140 worth of groceries. Declined. I tried my credit card. Declined. I stood there holding up the line, humiliated, while the cashier looked at me with pity. I had to leave the cart and walk out. I called Julian from the parking lot. He picked up on the fourth ring. "Oh, right," he said casually. I moved the rest of the liquid cash into the new holding company. I canceled the joint cards. I will give you a weekly allowance on a prepaid card. It is better for our tax strategy. He hung up. My own money. My salary went into that account too. He had trapped me. Then came the replacement. Her name was Chloe. She was 22 years old. She was an influencer, whatever that meant, and Julian hired her as his new marketing intern. I met her at a company barbecue we hosted in our backyard. She walked in wearing designer sunglasses and carrying a tiny dog in a purse. But that is not what caught my eye. What caught my eye was the silver necklace she was wearing, an antique silver pendant with a small emerald. My grandmother's necklace. the one Julian told me he had accidentally lost at the dry cleaners 6 months ago. I stared at her chest. I could not breathe. I walked up to her and complimented the jewelry. She twirled her hair and smiled. "Oh, thanks," she chirped. "Julian bought it for me. He said it was vintage. He said it belonged to some old lady who did not appreciate it anymore." I looked across the yard. Julian was watching me. He raised his beer in a toast and smirked. I walked into the guest bathroom, locked the door, and threw up. He was not just cheating on me. He was erasing me. He was giving my history to a girl who filmed TikTok dances in our kitchen. And speaking of those dances, she had absolutely zero rhythm. It was embarrassing to watch, but Julian thought she was a visionary with 2 million followers and the intellect of a houseplant. The public humiliation reached its peak at his company's annual holiday gala. We were standing in a circle of his executives. I was wearing a dress I had bought 3 years ago because I no longer had access to my own money. Julian had his arm around Chloe, who was officially his +1 for the evening. I was just the wife who drove there separately in a 5-year-old Camry. One of the executives asked Julian how we managed to balance such a dynamic modern relationship. Julian took a sip of his champagne, looked right at me, and smiled. "Elena is great," he said smoothly. "She is my starter wife. You know how it is. You build the foundation with the minivan model, and then you upgrade to the sports car when the company goes public." He patted Chloe's waist. The executives laughed nervously. I stood there, frozen. A starter wife, 15 years of my life, reduced to a bad punchline in a hotel ballroom. I walked out of the gala. I drove home in silence. I thought that was the worst it could get. I was wrong. The cruelty was just getting started. The spatial violation happened 3 days later. I came home from work on a Tuesday. It was freezing outside, one of those rare Texas winter storms where the wind cuts right through your coat. I walked into the house and went upstairs to my home office. The room was completely empty. My desk, my monitors, my books, everything was gone. In the center of the room stood Julian and a crew of guys setting up soundproofing foam and expensive microphones. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. Julian did not even look up from his phone. "I need a podcast studio," he said. "The crypto vlog is taking off. I moved your little accounting stuff to the garage." I ran downstairs and opened the door to the unheated, detached garage. It was 40 degrees in there. Sitting on the cold concrete floor were 4 black plastic garbage bags. Not boxes. Garbage bags. My life's work, my grandfather's journals, my professional documents, tossed into garbage bags like Tuesday trash. I stood in the freezing garage, my breath visible in the air, staring at the bags. I pulled out my laptop. The screen was cracked from where he had carelessly dropped it. I could hear his voice echoing from the house, testing his new microphone. "Welcome to the Visionary Alpha Mindset," he was saying, a podcast that had exactly 14 listeners. I laughed. It was a dark, broken sound. I sat on a paint bucket and pulled my coat tighter. The next morning, the Ally attack came. My phone rang. It was Julian's mother, Patricia. Patricia was a woman whose definition of aesthetic looked like a discount Kardashian. She had never liked me. She thought I was too quiet, too practical. I answered the phone. "Elena," she sighed, sounding deeply exhausted by my existence, "Julian tells me you are being difficult about the transition." "Transition?" I asked. "The divorce, dear," she snapped. "Do not play dumb. He is willing to give you $20,000 to start over. Take the 20 grand. It is honestly more than you are worth. Julian is building an empire. He deserves a woman who matches his aesthetic. Someone young, someone vibrant. Do not embarrass yourself by fighting this. Just pack your little bags and go back to San Antonio." She hung up before I could reply. I stared at the phone. They had planned this. The whole family knew. They were treating my life like a corporate restructuring. The institutional threat was the final blow. 2 days later, a process server knocked on the garage door. I was sitting on the paint bucket trying to work on my cracked laptop. The server handed me a thick manila envelope. Divorce papers. I opened them with numb fingers. Julian was not just leaving me, he was annihilating me. He was demanding the house. He was demanding full custody of our golden retriever, a dog he had never walked a single day in its life, and the financial section made my blood run cold. He claimed his startup was currently valueless due to market fluctuations. He claimed the Nevada company was a failed venture. He listed our joint assets at almost zero, but he listed our marital debt at $150,000, credit cards, business loans, personal lines of credit he had opened in my name. He wanted to split the debt evenly. He was leaving me technically homeless, bankrupt, and drowning in his liabilities. He walked into the garage a few hours later. He was wearing his expensive sneakers and holding a mug of artisan coffee. He looked around the freezing garage, looked at me sitting on the paint bucket, and smiled. "She is 22 and actually understands my vision," he said quietly, twisting the knife. "You just drain me, Elena. Have fun being homeless with your little calculators." He turned around and walked back into the warm house. He closed the door. The lock clicked, and that was the moment, the quiet turn. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not bang on the door and beg him to let me in. I just went completely still. I sat in that freezing garage for a full hour. I watched my breath ghost into the cold air. I looked at the garbage bags holding my life. I thought about Grandpa Henry. The person who controls the data controls the narrative. Julian thought I was a spreadsheet girl. He thought he could move numbers around a screen and I would just bow my head and accept it. He thought he was the smartest guy in the room. But Julian made one fatal mistake. He left a data architect alone in a room with a cracked laptop, a Wi-Fi connection, and absolutely nothing left to lose. I took a deep breath. My jaw tightened. My hands were freezing, but my mind was completely clear. "Okay," I whispered to the empty garage. "Okay." I opened my laptop. I connected to the Vance Capital Secure Network, and I went to war. Before I tell you what happened next, if you have not hit subscribe yet, please do. It really does help. Now let me tell you what my visionary husband did not see coming. I did not want revenge. I really did not. When this whole nightmare started, all I wanted was my fair share, my peace of mind, and a clean break. I wanted protection. But as I sat in that freezing garage, blowing into my hands to keep my fingers nimble over the keyboard, I realized something important. When you are dealing with a man who wants to destroy you completely, protection and revenge look exactly the same. What Julian did not know was that my timeline was completely different from his. He thought the clock started ticking the day he handed me those divorce papers. He thought he caught me by surprise. He had no idea that my clock started ticking 6 months earlier, on the Tuesday I found that Nevada Shell Company statement in his desk drawer. I spent the next 6 months living a double life. During the day, I played the role of the confused, heartbroken, technologically illiterate wife. I cried when he canceled my credit cards. I looked down when he insulted me in front of his friends. I let him think he was the smartest person in every room we entered. But at night, when he was asleep, or when he was out late with Chloe discussing his visionary marketing strategy, I was working. Let me explain how you dismantle a tech bro. People think cryptocurrency is this magical, untraceable ghost money. They think if you move it off a mainstream exchange and bounce it through a few digital wallets, it just disappears into the ether. Julian certainly thought that. He watched a few YouTube videos, listened to some podcasts, and convinced himself he was a financial mastermind. But blockchain, by its very definition, is a public ledger. Every single transaction is recorded forever. It is just a matter of knowing how to read the map. And reading data maps is literally what I do for a living. The first hurdle was getting into his network. Remember when he changed the house Wi-Fi to Vance Capital Secure and refused to give me the password? He told me it was military-grade encryption. It took me exactly 12 minutes to bypass his router security and pull the password from the administrative logs. Do you want to know what his unbreakable military-grade password was? Julian Vance, followed by the year he was born. I sat at my desk and laughed until my chest hurt. I thanked whatever higher power was listening for the boundless limits of male ego. Once I was on his secure network, I wrote a custom Python script. A packet sniffer, to be technical, but basically I built a digital wiretap. Every time his laptop or his phone connected to the home network, my script quietly copied the metadata of every website he visited, every server he pinged, and every IP address he communicated with. I did not need his passwords. I just needed to see where the data was going. Over 3 months, I watched his digital footprints march back and forth between our joint bank accounts, a cryptocurrency exchange, and a series of offshore holding addresses. But the real gold mine was sitting right out in the open. On Julian's home office desk, right next to his ridiculous, expensive microphone, he kept a heavy metal puzzle box. He bought it at some tech conference in Miami. He used to brag to his friends that it was a Japanese puzzle that required 27 precise movements to open. One night, while he was out with Chloe, I picked it up. It took me about 4 minutes of sliding the little brass panels to get it open. Inside was a single piece of heavy cardstock. Written on the card were 24 random words: apple, river, mountain, fence, yellow. It was a seed phrase, the master recovery key for his offline hardware wallet, the vault where he was storing all the crypto he had drained from our life savings. I took a photo of the card, put it back in the box, and slid the panels shut. But I could not just walk into court with a screenshot and a bunch of network logs. Judges do not understand packet sniffers. Lawyers can argue away digital footprints. I needed someone who spoke the language of the court. I needed a translator. That is where Mark Davies came in. Mark is a forensic accountant in his late 50s. Before he went into private practice, he spent 20 years as an investigator for the Internal Revenue Service. More importantly, Mark grew up in San Antonio. 30 years ago, my grandpa Henry fixed the transmission on Mark's first car for free so Mark could drive to his college interviews. Mark always told my grandfather that if his family ever needed a favor, he would be there. I called in the favor. For 2 months, I drove to Mark's office every Tuesday and Thursday during my lunch break. I brought him the routing numbers, the shell company documents, the IP logs, and the seed phrase. Mark took my raw data and turned it into a weaponized financial dossier. We mapped exactly how Julian siphoned $2.4 million out of our marital assets. We tracked how he inflated the operating costs of his startup to hide the missing money. We found the wire transfers he used to buy Chloe a sports car. We documented the massive, undeniable tax fraud he was committing by hiding his income in offshore accounts while claiming losses on his domestic returns. Mark looked at me across his desk one afternoon, tapped the thick binder we had built, and shook his head. "Your husband is not just a cheat, Elena. He is an absolute idiot. The IRS is going to peel him like an orange." I smiled. Grandpa Henry was right. The person who controls the data controls the narrative. So I waited. I let Julian pack my office into garbage bags. I let him lock me in the freezing garage. I let his mother call me and offer me $20,000 to walk away quietly. I let him do all of it because every time he escalated, every time he filed another piece of paperwork claiming he was broke and in debt, he was committing perjury. He was signing his name under penalty of perjury to financial disclosure forms that I knew with absolute mathematical certainty were fabricated. He was digging his own grave. I was just standing quietly at the edge, holding the shovel, waiting for him to get deep enough so he could not climb out. The reversal happened on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after he locked me in the garage. The setting was a high-end mediation boardroom in downtown Austin, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Colorado River, expensive leather chairs, pitchers of ice water with little slices of cucumber floating in them, the kind of room designed to make normal people feel small and intimidated. Julian was already sitting at the long mahogany table when I walked in. He was wearing a custom navy blue suit that probably cost more than my car. He was leaning back in his chair, checking his phone, looking completely bored. I found out later he had actually brought Chloe with him. She was waiting down in the lobby, drinking an iced matcha latte, waiting for him to finish discarding his wife so they could go to brunch. Sitting next to Julian was his lawyer, a guy named Richard, who wore a gold Rolex and charged $800 an hour. Sitting at the head of the table was the mediator, an older man with tired eyes who looked like he had seen 1,000 bitter divorces and hated every single one of them. I walked in alone. I was wearing a simple gray suit. I carried a large black leather tote bag. I took my seat across from Julian. I did not bring a lawyer. I told Julian I could not afford one, which he found incredibly amusing. Julian looked at me, sighed heavily, and put his phone face down on the table. "Are we really going to drag this out, Elena?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "I have a board meeting at 1 o'clock. Let us just get this over with." The mediator cleared his throat and opened his folder. "Mister, Vance's counsel has submitted the final financial disclosures and a proposed settlement," he said gently, looking at me with what I recognized as pity. "As you can see, Mrs. Vance, the marital estate is currently operating at a significant deficit. The business is valued at zero due to outstanding liabilities. There are $150,000 in shared debts." Richard, the expensive lawyer, folded his hands on the table and gave me a patronizing smile. "Elena," he said smoothly, "Julian is being incredibly generous here. He is willing to assume 75% of the debt, and he is offering a one-time lump sum payment of $20,000 to help you transition into a new living situation. I strongly advise you to take it. If we go to trial, you will walk away with nothing but legal fees and bankruptcy." Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Take the 20 grand, Elena," he said, repeating his mother's exact words. "It is honestly more than you are worth. Just sign the papers. Leave the real money to the adults. Go back to your little spreadsheets." I looked at him. I looked at the smug, arrogant curve of his mouth. I thought about the garbage bags in the freezing garage. I thought about my grandmother's necklace on Chloe's neck. I thought about the starter wife comment. I did not say a word. I reached down into my black tote bag and pulled out a 200-page heavy-duty binder. I placed it gently on the mahogany table. The thud it made was the loudest sound in the room. I slid the binder across the table. It stopped exactly halfway between Julian and his lawyer. "What is this?" the mediator asked, frowning. "It is a revised financial disclosure," I said, my voice completely flat, completely calm. Richard laughed. He actually chuckled. "Mrs. Vance, you cannot just submit random paperwork. We have hired independent auditors who have verified Mr. Vance's accounts." "Open it," I said. Richard rolled his eyes, opened the binder, and looked at the first page. It was the summary sheet Mark Davies had prepared. I watched Richard's face. It is a beautiful thing, watching an arrogant man realize he is trapped in a room with a live grenade. It took exactly 10 seconds for the color to completely drain from Richard's face. His eyes went wide. He quickly flipped to the second page, then the third. He saw the Nevada LLC. He saw the offshore routing numbers. He saw the crypto wallet addresses. He saw the dates, the times, and the exact dollar amounts that perfectly matched the withdrawals from our joint accounts. More importantly, Richard saw the detailed analysis of the tax fraud. He saw that Julian had hidden $2.4 million and had lied on federal tax returns, and Richard realized with absolute terror that he had just submitted fraudulent financial documents to a mediator, making himself an unwitting accomplice to a federal crime. "What is it, Richard?" Julian asked, sounding annoyed. "What did she print out?" Richard did not answer him. His hands were shaking. He flipped to the back of the binder. He saw the signed affidavit from Mark Davies, a former IRS investigator, verifying the authenticity of the network logs. I was almost feeling bad for Richard. Julian was paying him $800 an hour, and Richard was wasting all that expensive time reading my Reuter logs. Richard slammed the binder shut. He looked at me, terrified. Then he looked at the mediator. "We need to stop," Richard said, his voice cracking. "We need to halt this mediation immediately." Julian stared at his lawyer. "What are you talking about? Just make her sign the papers." "I cannot represent you any more, Julian," Richard said, standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the glass wall behind him. "I am withdrawing as your counsel, effective immediately. I have no part in this." Julian finally looked panicked. He looked at the binder, then looked at me. "Julian, what did you do?" he demanded, his voice rising in pitch. "What is in that book, Elena? What kind of fake numbers did you make up?" I sat perfectly still. I looked at the man who had tried to erase my existence. "The IRS already has the blockchain map, Julian." Those were the 10 words. The silent nuclear line. Julian froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood left his face so fast I thought he was going to pass out. He looked down at his trembling hands. The reality of what I just said crashed over him like a concrete wave. The IRS. The blockchain. He knew exactly what it meant. He knew I had the seed phrase. He knew he was caught. The mediator, realizing he was sitting in the middle of a massive fraud exposure, stood up and quickly packed his briefcase. "This session is concluded," he announced sharply. Richard practically ran out of the room. He did not even look at Julian. Julian sat there, completely abandoned. The expensive suit suddenly looked like a costume. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the hollow, staring panic of a cornered animal. He looked across the table at me. His eyes were wide, begging. "Elena," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Please, we can fix this. I can give you half. I can give you the house. Please do not do this." I slowly stood up from my chair. I smoothed the front of my jacket. I picked up my empty tote bag. I looked down at him one last time. "You will need that 20 grand for commissary." I turned around and walked out of the glass doors. I did not look back. I took the elevator down to the lobby. I saw Chloe sitting on a velvet sofa, sipping her green drink, oblivious to the fact that her meal ticket had just been incinerated. I walked out into the warm Austin sunshine, took a deep breath of fresh air, and smiled. The cascade was absolute. When a man builds his entire life on stolen money and massive ego, the collapse happens fast. Within 48 hours, the federal authorities froze every single one of Julian's domestic and offshore accounts. Mark Davies had sent the dossier to his old contacts at the agency the exact same minute I handed the binder across the table. Within a week, Julian's venture capital backers pulled their funding. When they realized the brilliant alpha visionary was actually a desperate fraud who had embezzled from his own startup to fund a fake lifestyle, the board forced him out and threatened a massive civil lawsuit. Within 2 weeks, the mistress abandoned ship. Chloe packed up her tiny dog, took the designer clothes Julian had bought her, and completely vanished. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she deleted all her videos with him and suddenly pivoted her entire online brand to a conservative, wholesome lifestyle. It was hilarious. Within a month, the bank foreclosed on the sterile, modern mansion in Westlake Hills. Julian had stopped paying the mortgage 6 months prior, assuming he could dump the debt on me in the divorce. The best piece of dark comedy in the entire ordeal was the podcast studio. The bank sent a repossession crew to clear out the house. I got a text from a former neighbor detailing how a massive guy named Earl hauled Julian's expensive microphones, soundproofing foam, and neon signs out to a box truck while Julian stood in the driveway crying. Julian tried to contact me exactly one time. It was 3 months after the mediation. He showed up at my office building and waited by my car in the parking garage. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, his clothes were wrinkled, and the arrogant spark in his eyes was completely extinguished. He stepped out from behind a pillar as I unlocked my Camry. "Elena," he said, his voice hollow and weak, "I need help. They are talking about federal prison. They are talking about 5 to 7 years. I have nothing left. My mom will not even take my calls. Please, nothing." "Can you just talk to the investigators? Can you tell them it was a misunderstanding?" I looked at him, really looked at him. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no pity. He was just a stranger who made a series of terrible choices and was finally meeting the consequences. I opened my car door. I did not raise my voice. I did not gloat. "Goodbye, Julian." I got in the car, locked the doors, and drove away, leaving him standing alone in the dark concrete garage. It has been over a year since that day. The divorce was finalized rapidly. Because Julian was under federal indictment, the family court judge awarded me everything I asked for and completely wiped out my liability for any of the debt he had accumulated. I kept my savings, my retirement, and my sanity. Last month, Julian Vance pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of tax evasion. He was sentenced to 4 years in a federal correctional facility. He is currently learning how to scale his vision while doing laundry for 30 cents an hour. As for me, I finally made the move. I am sitting on a wooden porch right now. I have a mug of regular, cheap drip coffee in my hands. The sun is just starting to come up over the hills, painting the Texas sky in streaks of orange and purple. I bought the property I always wanted, 10 quiet acres out in the hill country. It has an old farmhouse that needs some work, a big oak tree in the front yard, and absolutely zero smart home devices. I started my own data consultancy firm. I work my own hours. I choose my own clients. I make more money now than I ever did working corporate, but that is not the part that matters. The part that matters is the quiet, the absolute, unshakable peace of knowing that everything I have is mine. Nobody can take it. Nobody can belittle it. Nobody can pack it into garbage bags and throw it in a freezing garage. Grandpa Henry used to tell me that the person who controls the data controls the narrative. He was right. But I learned something else along the way. Sometimes the best narrative is the one you write after the villain has already been written out of the story. My life is small, it is quiet, and for the first time in almost a decade, I am completely free. Thanks for listening. More stories are on your screen right now. Click one. You won't regret it. See you in the next one.